a skyscraper win. I live on the 19th floor, and I'm no gone out to play ony mair. For since we moved to our new house, I'm wasting away, 'cause I'm getting one less meal every day. Oh, you can't fling pieces through a 20-story flat. 700 hungry wings will testify to that. If it's butter, cheese or Jeely, if the bread is plain or pan, the odds against it reaching us is 99 to 1.
Hello comrades and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of SPECTRE. Today I'm delighted to be joined by two very special guests from Save the Wyndford. Guys, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm on the Wyndford Residents Union committee.
My name's Nick. I'm also on the committee, and I've been in the Wyndford to raise my children. Really, I've been here 11 years.
Good stuff. Thanks very much, guys. So we'll just jump straight into it. So, yeah, the Wyndford, what's the history of the Wyndford like, and what's happening now in the current situations we're seeing with that scheme?
Well, first off, the Wyndford was public housing, but it was never council housing. It was built by the central government, and it was opened by Willie Ross during his socialist plan for Scotland. And it's fair to say that has led to an unusual history, because during the 1980s, the Tory government privatised what was the landlord, the Scottish Special Housing Association, and created Cube Housing Association out of thin air, and then decided, having given this new housing association 5,000 properties, that housing association should be in debt to the tune of £1 billion. So this led to a long period of underinvestment in the community. And it's fair to say that Cube, for its entirety, was a financially distressed landlord. And that led to all sorts of decisions, some of them good, some of them very bad. The good first, they thought outside the box because they couldn't afford to meet the Scottish quality housing standard brought in 2012. So they couldn't achieve that through the usual means of overcladding and ripping out storage heaters to put in new storage heaters. And they went for a district heating scheme without the overcladding. And to their good fortune and our good fortune, they found a pot of money, because British Gas phoned them up and said, we've got this money from the British government to do energy efficiency measures. So we ended up with all the overcladding and a new power station, which heats our heat and hot water. And it means that we have a collective response to heating. We don't have the sort of situation that you have where you've got 1,000 different providers for your heating. So that's good. But what's bad is the high flats in the way in which they were run down for a number of years. What would happen was Cube Housing Association would just take anyone at all who wanted to move in and not do any checks. And that led to a lot of vulnerable adults moving in who really needed wraparound support and didn't receive it. The new landlord, the GHA, is a very different beast. They were the former council housing in Glasgow, and they spent the past nearly 20 years, exactly 20 years. They were born in 2003 in the stock transfer, and they've spent most of that period tearing public housing down. They've been responsible for the demolition of around 40,000 public homes. They've built 3,500 to replace them. So the GHA is a huge monolith, and its response to its loss of power and status from demolishing all these homes is to simply acquire other housing associations. And they were able to do that with Cube Housing Association because it was financially distressed, and the GHA got the big bucks. So they came in telling us that they were going to provide £73 million of investment and a rent cap of 1% for the next 3 years. So tenants looking at Cube Housing Association, a historically bad landlord, thought, oh, well, that sounds good. The first we heard, of course, from the GHA in its new role after the stock transfer to the GHA was that 73 million consisted of 54 million for demolition. A nice Christmas present in 2021.
I'm just sitting here shaking my head, like no matter how many times you hear it, your mind boggles. I mean, we need something to change, because the big question is, where is everyone supposed to live? Like, I mean, yeah, it's it's just a travesty.
Yeah, no, cheers for that rundown, guys. I mean, I can just imagine how frustrating it is, and I think it's always good to get that sort of history and that track record of what's happening to support much of what we'll go on to talk about later on. So moving on from that, then I guess just sort of understanding, what empowered you to set up the Wyndford Residents Union and subsequently the Save the Wyndford campaign.
Well, I don't want to give you too long of a potted history, but there had been a residents' association set up here as a result of the struggle against the closure of the schools. So our scheme was designed by a guy called Harold Buteau, who was a pacifist architect. And the scheme itself sits in what was the former Highland Light Infantry Barracks. And we have a wall around it that dates that period. So Buteau's idea was it would be tridents into ploughshares, and he would really make a special effort to ensure that there was all the amenities on site. So we had 2 schools, we had a nursery school, we had a supermarket, we had a church, and we had a Catholic chapel just outside the scheme as well. So this was all well thought out in comparison to many housing schemes. In their wisdom, in 2009, the City Council decided they wanted to sell off these schools and basically make a property deal to build, bought houses there. And there was a sit-in by the local community, which lasted for over a month. And then the council gave up and granted a SOP, which they called a family centre. But that's become a much-loved community centre. We'd obviously preferred the schools. But as a result, people here were quite well organised. So it did come out of a kind of a working-class battle over schools. And, this is an area where there's a huge mix of tenures. There's people who are private tenants. There's people who are in various different projects. We had folk from Sam H. They had some tenancies, and then there were people on the homelessness list. And obviously there's people subletting flats and things like that as well. So many different tenures and tenancies, but it's fair to say there's a higher than average number of owner-occupiers because people availed themselves of the right to buy because Cube was such a terrible landlord. So that impacts on things. But as a result of fighting for these different cohorts of people, we took on Cube a fair amount, and Cube decided that they would de-recognise the Wyndford Residents Association as it was then, because to use the phrase of the outgoing chief executive David Mackenzie, we needed to take the power back. That's how they saw it in terms of fighting the Wyndford Residents Association. So there was no money, and it was clear that what we wanted to do was establish a membership organisation so that we would never be accountable to the landlord. And the landlord tried various things, setting up stooge organisations and things. But initially, we tried to work with Unite Community. That worked a little bit, but we didn't really get the traction. But after our long period of trial and error, I think we've got the method down. The way we work is households pay £2 a month to join, and if they're skint, it's £1 a month. The more important thing is that everyone's participating and given given that token to join. So yeah, we're a union now, and we're affiliated to the Scottish Tenants Organisation. But the actual organisation itself has had many incarnations and dates back to that original struggle to save our schools.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Laura, have you got anything to add as well?
No, it's a pretty good rundown. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I think that's a brilliant rundown, and now that you're a union, all power to you. And I guess talking about power as well, the Save the Wyndford campaign have been obviously following it closely, and I think a lot of people have as well. It's been great to see the support that's been given to the Wyndford Residents Union across multiple facets, whether that be financial or through social media and supporting and promoting the campaign in numerous amounts of ways. So it's fantastic to see. And I guess that effortlessly brings us on to the occupation then. So in your own words as residents, why do you feel that this is necessary? Why do you think you've been pushed to such extremes?
Well, just being completely stonewalled by GHA or the Wheatley group for the last I want to say 2 years, because even though the demolition wasn't announced until was it December 21, we knew this was coming. It was obvious that this was their plan for a long time. So we had already been talking about it and thinking of ways to get organized. Obviously, initially we started out just wanting to support the poor people that were getting evicted from their homes, and to make sure that they had the best deal, and that they were getting given the top priority that they were promised, so that they could get flats they actually wanted to move into, and they weren't just being moved to miles away from their local connections, from their community, their friends and family, and sometimes well out of their route to work and all the rest of it, which unfortunately did happen in some cases, because the GHA was really putting the fear into people, and sometimes threatening them and saying, oh well, you might not get another offer, or you might end up getting evicted, or going through the courts, you might get chucked out your flat, stuff like that. So initially we were just trying to support those tenants, but at the same time, we basically door chapped every household in the scheme to try to find out what people's feeling more generally was about the demolition. And our worry, obviously, at the time was that there's quite a vocal minority of people in the neighborhood that just kind of tout GHA's line of, oh, these flats are nice, or they're outdated, no one wants to live in towers anymore, and they're full of drug addicts anyway, so let's get rid of them. And we were worried that that might be a generally held opinion, and it turns out that it's not. A minority of people hold those views, but the vast majority of people in the Wynford are actually really opposed to the plans, because they've seen this happen elsewhere, and they know the score, they know what happens. There's no guarantee those houses will ever get built. If they do get built, there's no guarantee that it'll be social housing. And they don't want to see the place turned into a wasteland for years while they wait for something to be built.
Yeah, and thinking back to that November 2021, there was some debate about what to do, because I know that there were some people who felt it was a done deal, and it's fair to say those of us who've kept up the fight don't agree, but that was certainly something that was going on at the time.
Absolutely. At the time there was some discussion about whether it was at all realistic to even fight the demolition. It was being accepted as being a done deal, and that our main issue was our main focus should just be on supporting the tenants as best we could. I'm really glad that we said no. Actually, we're putting our foot down about this one, because this is a fight that's going to affect people across Scotland. This isn't just about the Wynford. This is about all over Scotland. We have a homelessness crisis, and we have a crisis in a lack of social housing. We need to turn this around and start thinking about where working class people are going to live and what kind of communities they're going to live in, and start shifting our priorities.
Yeah, we need to think big. I mean, I remember we as I said, we've been through many incarnations, and at one stage we were a living rent branch, and I know that the union living rent took the view that branches should focus on one thing. But as I said before, we've got many different tenures and many different interest groups, and so that wasn't really a viable thing that we could do. And yeah, we do need to think big, because this isn't just what's happening to us. We saw the GHA advertise a demolition officer, so they're paying someone 40-45 grand to work 5 days a week to defeat us. But in the advert, it talked about once the demolition was over, this demolition officer would have to work across group, including in Dumfries and Galloway. Mm-hmm. And the significance of that is the Wheatley group has seized control of all the former council housing in Dumfries and Galloway. So the way in which they want to demolish social housing here and replace them with these yuppie houses, these mid-market rent, £900 a month private tenancies, they want to do that right across the country, because the Scottish government's prepared to pay for that. So, we're making a stand here, not just for the Wynford, but for the rest of the country as well. And I think it was wrong to say that we should only take on one thing. I think we need to take on all the things.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking more about people within the Wynford and not being sure what kind of fight that we could wage against this. But certainly in terms of Living Rent as an external organisation that was at one time we were affiliated to, we were instructed not to do this campaign. I mean, quite boldly told not to do it. So yeah, I'm really glad that this has gone ahead, because the support has been fantastic, and like Nick says, this is one of the major fights of our generation. Yeah. There's a reason that so many people across Glasgow and across Scotland care enough to join organisations like Living Rent, because they can see that we're at breaking point. But the problem that we have is that this is a social scheme. We're talking about social housing here. The same things that apply to the rented sphere we're experiencing them here. And we really need representation for social tenants in Scotland. We need a way for those people to get together, and that's kind of what we're looking at trying to build going forward.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, guys. It's great to hear that mentality of getting the foot down and no surrendering to these giants such as Wheatley. And going off on a tangent here, then just to inform folk on Wheatley and some of the acts that they've done and the run up and their plans for this demolition. It's been quite interesting to see their tactics, especially of how they've calculated their responses from residents within the Wyndford. It's certainly interesting to see where they get their figures from. I'm just wondering if you can come in on that and how they've been able to amplify the voice of the minority.
They just make it up.
Yeah, there really is so much to say here. Maybe let's start at the beginning. They ran what they call the consultation, which consisted of some open meetings where you went along and they blathered at you. And I don't know how they were meant to get data from that, but they didn't have a questionnaire or whatever. They did put round a questionnaire to tenants, but it had facile leading questions like, how excited are you about the £73 million regeneration and the demolition of 120 block, 151 block, 171 block, 191 block, Wyndford Road? So, and they had little smiley faces, on each of the tick boxes. And that, if you vote in an election, you don't do it like that. Let's put it that way. And what we found out subsequently, because they keep touting a figure of 85% support, is that they received, in their view, 300 responses. But bear in mind, some of these were not anything in terms of paper or a ballot or anything like that. And they said this was often up to the housing officer to decide whether the tenant was in favour of the plans. Now, if you were organising some kind of ballot or consultation, you would never accept that, never in a million years. So as far as we're concerned, that figure's just made up. It's nonsense. But they've continued in the same duplicitous vein. They have profiled the tenants. So at the start, they were looking for people they could see as vulnerable, and they put the frighteners on them and said, "Oh, you better leave, or the lawyers will come in." They racially profiled the tenants. So BAME tenants, foreign tenants, were outright told, "No, you don't have an option to stay in the Wyndford because you haven't lived here long enough." And on one occasion, we even caught them putting that in writing, and we got a word from their locality area director, Lindsay Heggie, saying, "No, that's not happening. No, I've instructed my staff not to do that, but we know it happened." And then just recently, we heard of an anecdote. A chap in one of the blocks moved out in November. He was given £3,500 in cash. This man had a bad drink problem, and he went on a bender. But they were just trying to get him out, and they're using all the tactics. The other thing that they've started to do, and we've found some evidence of this, because we received a letter from the GHA chair, Bernadette Hewitt, in which it was what they called myth busting. So the usual crap from GHA, but it was all written in red text. We dispute this and so on. But in this email, Bernadette Hewitt talked about how many tenants are in the Wyndford Residents Union and how many owners are in the Wyndford Residents Union, and went on a lie, but went on to say, "Oh, there's people who don't live in the scheme who are in the Wyndford Residents Union." But the interesting thing about that mapping is that it is not an academic exercise. We know that tenants involved in the fight now are being told by the GHA, "Oh, we better have a conversation with you about your tenancy." So they're using all the tactics, and they're very duplicitous. And they are sincere about their mapping efforts and their attempts to defeat us. So we're taking it very seriously.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, the tactics have been quite rightly disgusting, especially those in the media, where Wheatley having to rely on those who have already moved out and are living somewhere different, and they're bringing them in to talk about the Wyndford and, as you say, toe the Wheatley line. And the line that's always used against working class communities, that these vital housings are nothing more than an eyesore for the middle class and the rich in the surrounding areas. And as well as you've said, and the information that's been obtained, I remember that the Wyndford Residents Union were able to file for a freedom of information request on how they obtained their figures. And as you've said, 85% of the tenants are in favour of destroying the Wyndford, they said. Yet the housing officer was given the sole decision to determine if a resident, based off those promiscuous surveys that they were given, was in favour. And how can you come to that decision based off a survey that is almost primary school level? It's utterly diabolical to sort of play on what the residents are feeling. You know, there's no denying that, you know, residents such as yourself want to see improvements within the scheme itself, but that doesn't mean you subsequently not want the whole area bulldozed down. So yeah, I mean, it is really, you know, it's disgusting to see these tactics employed by, I think it's the largest monopoly for social housing here in Scotland. So yeah, I can only repeat this time and time and again, but all power to you and all those involved with Save the Wyndford for all the work you are doing, because we know for a fact that Wheatley are going to fire up more and more obstacles as this campaign progresses. And talking about the campaign itself and the Wheatley Group's proposal to demolish the flats, there's a severe environmental cost to this proposed demolition. Just wondering if you can come in and sort of talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, the demolition, so there's so many different angles again to this, because the demolition itself will actually release something like 10,000 tons of carbon into the carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So that's huge. And then you've got the actual and on top of that, every bit of material from those 4 flats is going to be broken down on site. So that's polluting the River Kelvin, that's further polluting the environment, and also destroying all this green belt land that we've got surrounding the estate, which is one of the things that makes it, as Alan Dunlop was saying, our architect friend, that it's a completely unique residential environment. There's nothing like it in the rest of Scotland, and it's true, because it's the perfect use of space in terms of conserving the environment. You know, you've got all this like sizable, good quality housing, and then all this lovely green space, which can be used by people. We've got football parks, we've got playgrounds, and then you've got all the wildlife living down by the River Kelvin, which obviously the GHA or the Wheatley Group have commissioned their own, you know, wildlife reports and paid people to come along and assess the area and say, no, nothing lives here, it's fine. But we're actually looking at doing our own assessments to show that there are actually lots of rare animals or protected species living in the area. And we've been pushing like crazy, obviously, for this environmental impact assessment, which they felt they didn't need, which is preposterous. You can imagine blowing up 4 apartment buildings and thinking you don't need to do an environmental impact assessment for that. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been lobbying councillors, we've been lobbying the Green Party like crazy to just say, and obviously we put in all our oppositions to the planning application, which they then turned around and decided they didn't need one. But now at least people have started changing their tune, and the council has come out and said that they are actually in favour of a proper environmental impact assessment being carried out.
Well, they're doing a scoping exercise, which is a kind of quasi-legal thing. And if it goes the wrong way, we can appeal. And the benefit of that, of course, is that while that process is ongoing, GHA can't pursue its demolition. So a bit of a victory for the demonstration and direct action last week.
But on top of that, of course, we've invited Patrick Harvey to our upcoming public meeting and had a kind of confusing and disappointing response from him, but we're still hopeful that we can get some more dialogue with him about this, because it's obviously his area. But one of the major outcomes of COP26 was a whole load of noise being made about how we needed to retrofit buildings instead of tearing them down and building anew. As we've seen done, for example, at Cedar Court down the road, which is a lovely retrofit and has been hugely successful, and which was the toast of COP26. They held events there and everything saying how great this was and that this is the way forward. So, I mean, really, we're waiting for Patrick Harvey to tell us, well, why not in the Wyndford? Why can't we have nice things? Yeah. Why can't we have mass social housing that is decent quality, that is up to energy standards, that is lasting, sustainable, and surrounded by the lovely green space, which we can preserve?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that point about the retrofit, because the GHA's own structural engineering survey done by AJ Balfour shows that the flats can be retrofitted. Now, obviously, you're in the pay of the GHA and they want you to say they can't be. So that was a bit telling. But the figure that AJ Balfour report came out at to retrofit to meet a net zero no emissions standard was £55 million. The figure for demolition and rebuild is £54 million. So there's not a huge gap between those two figures. And certainly we think that the GHA's costs for retrofitting, which, as Laura said, would save 10,000 tonnes of carbon in the critical period over the next 5 years. We think that they've inflated those costs. And we have a VAT expert coming to talk about that at our public meeting on Saturday.
Yeah, no, it sounds really good, guys. I mean, you've covered a lot of points in the environmental impact there, and it's one of the points that seems to be completely overlooked. As you've covered there, COP26, the Scottish government, time and time again, ever since the COP summit, has continued to fail in meeting its targets. And when it's given a chance here, it's choosing not to. It is making the choice to not meet these targets. And like we're talking about the quality of the housing as well, it's got an EPC rating of a C, and that is actually higher than what the average needs to be for social housing in Scotland. So the argument is there to retrofit. I can say this from experience, being young and looking for a flat, an EPC rating. When you find a flat like that, there's queues out the door to try and even just view the property, and never mind get your say in and try get in a bid. So the demand for that kind of quality, and to improve that quality even further for these flats would be more than beneficial. And the use of the green space as well, we're actively encouraging people to get out more and join in their local community. But how are they going to participate within that community and want to participate within it when that green space and the areas surrounding it are non-existent? What does that give? So I think the environmental impact will be catastrophic, really, and it will be interesting to see, as you've said, calling in the Greens to stand up for what they spout to believe in, for not just what it will have in the wildlife, as you've rightly mentioned, for the survey and that, but just its impact from what's been continuously shouted about throughout the years at COP26. Very few of these nations that came to it were wanting subsequent change coming after it. The countries most affected are your overexploited countries. I had the pleasure of meeting the Cuban delegation before it, and they were constantly going on about what they're wanting to achieve and what they're wanting these nations to come out and doing for the world as well. And it's a slap in the face to these countries that are so deeply impacted by climate change that the Scottish government's got a chance here and it's throwing it away. And it only adds to your argument even further. So moving on from that, then we've not just got the environmental impact of the proposed demolition, we've also got the effect on the community and a societal basis as well. Just want to get you guys' views of what this demolition will mean for the community.
Well, I'm raising my children here. I said that at the beginning. Both my children, my son is 10, my daughter's 7. They've lived their whole lives here. And if we are unsuccessful, they'll grow into adults during a building site that's going to last 5-7 years. There's going to be concrete breaking with pile drivers, big lorries going up and down Wyndford Road. It's really going to divide the community. And also, there's no guarantee that GHA will stop at these 600 flats. Why? We have more tower blocks than the whole of Dundee, just in our little nuke of Maryhill. So if those tower blocks weren't fit for purpose, what about the other tower blocks in our scheme? Why would they stop there? We're all sat on very high land values. And, the amenity of the area is a sort of saving grace. This is still a very poor area. We are one of the hardest hit communities. The entire community is at the bottom of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation for data zones. So, we're either about in the bottom 300 at 7,500 or in the bottom 150. So this is an area that needs investment. People need hope for the future. And turning it into a concrete jungle, that's not hope.
Yeah, I mean, I just to speak to that, I know a woman whose child has severe asthma. She's looking at potentially having to, well, I mean, she probably will have to move if this goes ahead because the dust and everything, she's right on the site. I might have to move because I've got 2 rescue dogs that don't like constant noise. So I think I'm going to be going mad with the dogs barking all the time because it's going to be non-stop. So it's really going to make life around here a lot harder for us. But I mean, not to mention, it's more about what kind of homes and what kind of future do we want? What kind of communities do we want to live in the future? Because anybody that's looking at the demolition as a good thing and imagining that that symbolizes a return to, you know, like everybody has their own little house with a picket fence and a front door, and that's just not the reality going forward. That's not a reality that's going to be achievable for most people. We need proper social housing going forward, and that's the thing that, you know, like if they're going to demolish, they need to be really, really clear about what they're planning to build in its stead, and there's just no impetus, no demands being put on them to actually show what their plans are, to prove that those plans are in any way beneficial to the community.
No, that's true. I mean, over the past 2 weeks, the figure that GHA has been using for a number of social housing and these mid-market rent noddy houses for, you know, people earning over £21,000. That figure went from 250 to 255 in the space of a few days. What they told the politicians, though, at the start, before they moved on any of the other communications, what they told the politicians in private was they wanted 300 mid-market rent homes. I think there's a real question for your listeners to ask here. Why does the Scottish Government fund these private tenancies? That's what mid-market rent is. It's a private tenancy. You don't have the same rights as a social housing tenant. You can be toughed out at a moment's notice. You have to earn over £21,000. You can't earn more than £41,000. If you lose your job, you're to be evicted. You know, this is what the Scottish Government is funding. It's very peculiar. Unless, of course, what you wanted to do was really push the private rental sector as much as possible and transform social housing landlords into private landlords.
Yeah, I think that's really well summarised, guys. I mean, the effect, we could talk even more on the effects of landlords for hours, but so I'll not get started too much in that. But as you said, we've seen it in after this the Thatcher years where people were buying up the social housing and the prices on them skyrocketing through rent, and it's not done any good whatsoever. Surprise, surprise. In Scotland, we're already facing, you know, a growing homeless crisis, and you know what good does demolishing 600 homes and replace them with half the amount do for anyone? It's not going to resolve any issues for the vulnerable people who are already living in the Wyndford, who aren't receiving the wraparound care that they deserve and need. It's not going to solve any issues. It's just going to add to the current crisis. And you know, it's either total ignorance or I don't even know what else it could be, cruelty to just go ahead with this decision with that in mind, as well as we've talked about the effect in the community. You know, nobody wants to live beside a building site, let alone one that's got no clear end date on it as well. Who knows how long it will take for Wheatley to complete their constructions. So I can imagine how uncomfortable it is.
There's a point there, Nathan. You only need to look around many of the areas where the GHA has previously demolished lots of social housing to find that they're perfectly happy to leave vast bomb sites for dozens of years. I mean, I was just in Hamilton Hill today, where I used to live, and I fought the GHA then to try and save my home. I lost. That area still hasn't been built on, and I'm talking 2010. That was so 13 years ago. Over the road from me, on the other side of Hamilton Hill, there was an area that was demolished right at the very beginning of the GHA, still not been built on. You know, you can go right around the city and you can find all these gap sites. So there's absolutely no guarantee that they will build. And another aspect of the GHA's business is it makes a lot of money from the bonds market based on the land value. And one thing we can say for certain is that because of our proximity to the West End of Glasgow, to the Botanic Gardens, you know, we're literally about 5 minutes walk from Botanic Gardens, and the relatively affluent suburb Kelvindale, and sat on both the canal and the Forth and the Kelvin. You know, we are an area of very high land value, and that land value will just continue to rise. So you know, no guarantee that they will build anything.
Yeah, spot on, Nick. I mean, bandits, that's probably the number one word I can come up to describe Wheatley, given how they've left areas in and around Glasgow and Scotland also. And talking on the social impact, you've also had great support from the likes of Chris Mitchell from the GMB, who have had on the show previously, and he supports the much needed TLC for the Wynford, and he's also stated that he's got members who stay in that area, and if these flats get knocked down, then there's going to be a high element who just can't afford to stay in that gentrified area any longer. And the gentrification of the Wynford, as you've sort of alluded to, the value in the eyes of those bandits like Wheatley of being so close to the weekend, the West End. Sorry, what would the gentrification of that area mean for you, and how would that impact other areas in the next few years if this demolition were to go ahead?
Well, it means getting priced out of the Wynford altogether for a lot of us, and that process is already happening. I mean, homeowners get letters through the door constantly asking to buy their houses off them. So this is the thing. Also the homeowner bills have been going up like crazy. So Wheatley tries to make the most out of everyone that lives on the Wynford as they can. And the effect that has is that a lot of working class people are looking at, they just can't afford to live here anymore because of it. But I think the idea is to generally slowly move all the working class people out of the Wynford and start tearing it down and building anew. And the problem is that they've done this. You've seen it, the new builds that they've been building along the canal and that. They are dead, soulless areas. They are not pleasant places to live. They are not places that have any, there's no one out and about. They don't get used. And I think I can't imagine what people are imagining will replace the high flats if they are in favour of the demolition. But I'm dreading another sort of is it the Botany where they destroyed the social housing and they built new builds, some of which ended up being social housing, but not a lot.
Campaign, though.
Only because they fought tooth and nail for it. But also there's a big kind of difference between the social housing that was built there and the private housing as well. But there it's you're talking about concreting over like swathes of greenbelt land to create just roads and little cul-de-sacs and like then some higher buildings like right on the riverfront. It's just going to be a much less pleasant place to live for everyone forever,
Yeah, of course, there's so many people benefit from passing through the Kelvin Walkway, which is effectively part of our scheme, and the green space within it, who will lose out as well. So even if you're not interested in the social housing angle, you really only care about the Kelvin Walkway, you will still be badly affected by this. What we saw in our campaign to prevent the council privatising a section of land nearby our scheme at Kleiner Street, at the top of the canal locks, what we saw there was the council desperately trying to make a buck from an area that had been social housing, cleansed by the GHA of any homes and left to rot for 15 years. The council then wanted to build 400 yuppie flats on it. So you can see the agenda all around us.
Sorry, if I can just add to that, is there's the buy-to-let element, obviously. Yeah. Rents are going to skyrocket. And Nick was saying to me yesterday, I think, that there's a flat, the same flat as what we're sitting in just now talking to you, Maisonette flat in the Wynford, is now being rented out for
£2,100 a month in 4 box rooms. So I said at the beginning, I moved here to raise my children. I was living in London in a very leafy part of London called Crouch End, because it was near a tube station. And there was a residents association there comprised of homeowners that lived in the townhouses. And what they were trying to do is prevent what happened to create my flat at the time, where these townhouses were subdivided into tiny little bedsits. And the property developers were trying to buy up these townhouses so they could do that to the interior of the townhouse and then build a tower block on the garden to really maximise their value. And I remember calling it the hutch when I was living there. And, it was no place to raise a family. And it seems that as a result of these processes, the hutches are moving to Glasgow. They're moving to the Wynford. Over the road from where me and Laura are sat just now, there's a flat where they stripped out the kitchen and they turned the living room into a separate box room. So, maximise your value. And obviously that means that any mid-market rent housing that the GHA build, we suspect 300 is their intention, would be charging £900 a month. Who is earning that money in a city where the mode average wage is less than the minimum wage?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's frightening to see, and it's almost hard to wrap your head around when you view it from that point as well. From the price and the wage, and we're told that the real living wage, but the real living wage, it's not enough to cover anything. What does it actually cover? And like we talk about with the social element in the housing, there's, when it comes to the argument of those like Wheatley promoting against it, there's a very strong element of classist reporting. And we touched on it sort of very briefly earlier in regards to drugs and those vulnerable within the Wyndford. And this is something that's always shoehorned in, and I believe to discredit working class organisation within these communities. And time again, it completely negates the point for the need for the Wyndford regeneration. What good is going to demolishing these homes and putting people who are vulnerable or suffer from addiction? What's it actually going to do to them? It's not going to do anything. It's going to accelerate their addiction, and they're going to be added to the large statistic that's already plaguing just over Glasgow, not even just Scotland as a whole, but even Glasgow's frightening statistics. I'm just looking to get your thoughts on how certain media channels have talked about the Save the Wyndford campaign, and how you feel about that reporting, if it's an attack on you as a community.
Absolutely, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And there's been a real stigmatization of our community as a result of this, and a real attempt to separate the kind or the class of people that live in high flats from the class of people that would live in maisonettes or slightly lower high flats. And it's absurd. As we all need flats. These are people who live. These are your neighbours. But part of what's galling is that we, as a residents' union, have spent years trying to tackle problems to do with antisocial behaviour, to do with drug pushers in the neighbourhood, targeting the young people, dealing drugs in front of our little shop, in front of the nursery, and all this. And we've come up with really inventive solutions for dealing with these, like some of which have led to us having like a new youth community youth centre open on site, and there have been some positive changes made, but we've had to fight like crazy to make that happen against GHA. Do you know what I mean? So for them to then turn around and use drug addiction or antisocial behaviour as an excuse to tear down our flats and destroy our community is really on the nose.
Yeah, there's an element of journalism where obviously, a lot of journalists are seeking balance, but there's a cohort of people that don't live in communities like ours who have stigmatized views of our community, and they see projecting those views onto us as a way of having balance in the reporting. And I know with the John Beattie interview on BBC Radio Scotland, there was certainly an element of that, where the Radio Scotland found two people who no longer lived in the community and were wanted to see the flats pulled down, and that they added in, but there's druggies as well, and that was from John Beattie rather than the two former tenants. So you get a lot of that, and I think it's good to push back and say, look, if you want balance, let's listen to the guff from the GHA and let them explain why it will save carbon to blow up, all that embodied carbon. Let the architects and the professionals laugh at that, because they're a holy show, really. There was in fact a cartoon in the Architects Journal lampooning them, talking about them building noddy houses. So let them speak for themselves. We don't need any lies. Let the GHA out themselves as completely out of touch.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, guys. And I guess just moving on to the final point then is, that continued argument for this regeneration. I just want to see, if we had folk from Wheatley in the room right now, if they'd be brave enough to show their faces, what would be the key defining points that you'd give to them and explain to them that as long as they don't meet these points, then the political occupation of these flats will continue?
Well, the first is, had they come to us and said, We want to build 600 socially rented homes to replace these 600 socially rented homes. We might have entertained an argument, but that's not what they're doing. They're halving the amount of they're halving the amount of housing, and it's not going to be social housing. And what they're doing is they're halving the amount of housing, doubling their rental income, and completely getting rid of their management costs. So I would say to them, we need at least 600 homes on the table. And they would come back and they would probably say, oh, but that would be very expensive. Oh, and you'd have to build really high. And I'd say, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you've already got some very high flats and they've already packed in 600 homes. And then we'd say, why have you dismissed the case for retrofit? We know it's cheaper than demolition and rebuild. We know it's more environmentally friendly. And they'd say, oh, what about the VAT? And we'd say, well, no, you've been lying about the VAT. And they'd say, oh, the AJ Balfour report. And we'd say, well, our structural engineering report that we're presenting on Saturday shows the AJ Balfour report to be conservative in its assumptions and fundamentally flawed. And then point to their Dr. Richard Atkins report saying the carbon analysis that he produced says it's more environmentally friendly to blow up the blocks and start again. And we'd say, no, our carbon analysts, EALA Impacts, have analysed his report and found it to be flawed. And we'd say we have, the support of various powers that be to push this forward. So we need to get that negotiating position, but we must start with 600 flats, and we must start with keeping the ones we've got there already.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we can get the guys from Wheatley down to finally meet the residents, or the residents they don't want to meet, the residents they know that they'll fight tooth and nail for these flats, and quite rightly so. And just sort of finishing off then, just looking to see if you guys have got any final talking points, and whereabouts can we find using social media so everybody can stay up to date and hopefully get involved in playing their part and helping save the Wyndford.
Yeah, so follow us on Facebook. You can follow the Residents Union on Facebook. That's just Wyndford Residents Union, and everything.
Wyndford Residents. Facebook.com.
Oh, sorry, you're right. It's just Wyndford Residents. Yeah, sorry. And then you can also follow us on Twitter, but you can also follow the campaign on Twitter. That's Save the Wyndford, at Save the Wyndford. And then of course we've got our big public meeting coming up on Saturday. So come along to that, because we're going to be laying out the full argument. We'll also be making a high quality video recording of that so that we can show it to every single politician. They can't ignore us anymore, to get their comments on that and start proper dialogue about getting them to negotiate with us. But also I'm quite excited about something that we were talking about doing in about 3 weeks' time, which was having a walk from that dead land up at Hamilton Hill where they never built anything. So we'd start out there and then do a wee walk down to the Wyndford past the high flats, and then end up in the White House Cafe for an event that evening. So I'm quite excited about that, because we've got a lot of art and stuff around the campaign already, so we'll be showing off some of that. But yeah, the big one is trying to make it out for our public meeting in the Hub at 1 o'clock next Saturday. That's the 11th of February.
Yep, Wyndford Road. You can't miss it though. It's a giant school building in the middle of the community. That's our community centre. So we really hope to see you there.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic, guys. Sadly, I won't be able to attend, but I'll be mustering up as many folk as I can to get to that, because it sounds absolutely fantastic. The stuff you've got planned upcoming to just re-emphasise your points, especially in regards to the dead land that Wheatley has left in its trail. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to hearing everything that's planned and proposed for that meeting. But yeah, thanks again, guys, for taking time out your busy schedules, I imagine, with all this. And yeah, I keep finding myself saying it, but all power to you. And I'm looking forward to how this campaign develops, especially some of the sly tactics that we might find Wheatley employ, which is no surprise given how your attitude has not been dampened by anything that they've done across the proposal for this demolition and their acts in liaison with the police during the occupation. So all power to you guys, and I look forward to hearing more about the campaign.
A pleasure, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade.
Thanks again, comrades, for tuning in to another episode of SPECTRE. It's absolutely vital that as many of you can give support to the Wyndford residents, YCL Britain, and the other activists who have occupied the Wyndford high-rises, which are set to be demolished by Wheatley Homes. Make no mistake, this is an assault on the working class, and it requires a working class counterattack to combat it. Wheatley will employ every single tool that they have at their disposal to undermine the Wyndford residents at every single turn. We've already seen that with the doctoring of their figures and their so-called 87% approval rating. Wheatley is promoting a figure from 309 responses from a scheme with over 1,600 households, arguing that a majority in the scheme support the demolition is a flat-out lie. Since the launch of the political occupation of the Wyndford flats, there's been an outcry of solidarity and support from every corner of Scotland. No wonder this is a crisis that affects us all. The Wyndford residents are clear. The flats will not come down. The community will fight to ensure it so. Not only do the Wyndford residents have the support of the YCL, other activists, and the general public, they also have the support of professional bodies. These professional bodies stand ready to debunk the many lies and counter-arguments deployed by Wheatley in their attempt to bulldoze and socially cleanse the Wyndford residents. Let us all stand together with the Wyndford residents and fight. Let's fight for homes, for people, not for profit.
Sometimes, maybe more than some of the time, I'm on a false ego trip. Insecurity is rife. I'm not the ideal person to be lecturing on life, but if you wanna know some things I've learned about myself, being in sticky situations, I won't bore you with the filth. Breaking bones and sniffing gear, pouring blood and sweat and tears. In a nutshell, I suppose that's the way the water flows. Yeah, that's the way the story goes. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes, well, alright, maybe all of the time, I'm on a false ego trip. Well, I'm a renegade of sorts. I roam the concrete jungle hunting idiots for sport. And now the cocaine scene, it picked me up and made me frown. There's a joke, he says the music helps the medicine go down. Hey, it makes you feel alive, more like demons of the night. Putting powder up your nose, that's the way the water